I'm so happy you're here. I'm so happy to be with you today. And I love sharing my life with people, in particular to share with you people that are important to me. Now, at first you're going to think, oh no, this is going to be boring. I promise you won't. I want to talk to you about my grandmother. I was very blessed. God blessed me with two wonderful grandmothers. Sadly, I never knew either one of my grandfathers. My grandfather on my mom's side died before I was born, and my grandfather on my dad's side went through some personal issues in life where I never met him. I was never introduced to him for a lot of reasons we don't need to get into. I always felt, though, that there was a hole in me of love. I always felt jealous, like when I played baseball or I wrestled, I played football. Whenever I would see, other kids have grandpas there, or even their dads, because my dad loves me tremendously, but my dad worked at the paper mill, and he worked swing shift his entire life. So that meant 7 to 3, Dad was in a great mood. 3 to 11, I never saw Dad. When he worked graveyard shift, 11 to 7, I went for a lot of walks just to stay out of the house, just trying not to wake up my dad. And for me, there was always that mystery. Who was my grandfather's, both in terms of the good, the bad, and the ugly? And my grandmother, Edna, on my mom's side, I always got a sense of how loving my grandfather must have been because of the season we're coming up to. My favorite season is fall. How many of you like fall, most of all? Amen. But second to it, it's not necessarily spring. Spring to me is kind of like mud season. Like you walk around, oh, goodness gracious. It kind of soppy. But my favorite part of spring is that window when the apple blossoms come on the trees. And it's very short. And the reason is not just because it beautifies everything. But when I was a kid, my grandmother Edna lived across the road from me. It was such a blessing to have my grandma literally across the road. When I got bored at home, ran to grandma's. When I got bored at grandma's, I ran home. And there's this one old rickety tree. Every year, the apple blossoms were just boom, all over the place. And my grandmother, I remember, for me, she was older when I remember her. We'd go out in her walker. And we all just let her alone. That's the one time when we would see our grandmother walking around, we're like, all right, who's going to go out to make sure she doesn't fall? That was the one time we left her alone. And the reason being, that old rickety apple tree, she would go out, lean into her kneeler, and just stare at it. And the reason she would, my grandmother was born in 1906. She lived to 105, died in 2012. And when she started teaching in 1925, during the Great Depression. And that year, when she started, she was a one-room schoolhouse teacher. How many of you have grandparents that love Little House on the Prairie? And you go in the house, oh gosh, this boring show. That was my grandma. She was a one-room schoolhouse teacher. And when she started at 19 years old, teaching in 1925, my grandfather read in the newspaper that there was this new teacher at the one-room schoolhouse. Having never met her, having no idea who she was, as the story goes, the family lore, he read that newspaper and he's like, I'm going to marry that teacher. I'm going to marry her. And what he did is he went out to that apple tree, because school year starts in the fall. Apples were grown, filled a basket of apples. It's like, I'm proud of my apples. I'm going to woo her. I'm going to woo her with these apples. Take her on a date and make her my wife. So he took the basket, went to the school. Hello, Edna. My name is Anthony Riley. I'd like to bring you a gift. As someone new to the area, here's a basket of apples. What do you think my grandmother did with them? Well, first of all, do you think that she liked the gift? Think she did? I would have, because I like apples. So she hated them. Because see, my grandmother's a very practical woman. She's not really sorry, Grandma. She's not a lovey-dovey type. She's not a warm fuzzy. So my grandpa Anthony thought, I'm being Rico Suave. My grandma thought, now I gotta peel them and can them and store them. This crazy guy just gave me work. My grandfather said, would you go on a date with me? No, get out of my classroom. Kicked him out. Well, brought a second basket of apples. She got even more mad because that was even more peeling and canning and all that stuff. Would you have a date with me? No. Then my grandfather thought, maybe she doesn't like apples. Maybe that's the thing. Well, what else can I bring to try to convince her to go on a date? I know, back in the day, and you're going to laugh, the smartphone generation, pencil sharpeners were a rare gift in 1925. The way you would sharpen pencils is with a knife. She had a pencil sharpener, and he remembers, I know I'll do. I'll buy a box of pencils. I'm not good with sharpening pencils here. Can I sharpen pencils with your pencil sharpener? Oh, go ahead. So he was sharpening the pencils. Asked her again, will you go on a date? And my grandmother granted him a date simply to get rid of him. All right, I'll go out on one date with him. I'll give him the cold shoulder. I'll blow him off. And that will be it. And the rest is history. And about a year later, they were married. On that one date. So in a couple of weeks, when the apple blossoms come, at the gushy like my grandfather, Anthony Riley, whom I never met, who I aspire to be even though I never met him, every time I see apple blossoms, I remember my grandmother leaning on her kneeler, just looking at it, and she would stand there for like an hour. And then she would just, as she came back, then we went out to make sure she got back to the house okay, because we knew the time. Because there's only 2 times in my life I saw my grandmother cry. Only 2. One, when she talked about when my grandfather died a week before I was born. And 2, when I told her I was going to be a priest. Those were the only 2 times I've ever seen my grandmother Riley cry. Now, tough, stern teacher. She taught until she was 97 years old. She started teaching in 1925. Took 1 year of retirement, hated it, went back as a volunteer teacher for free until she was 97. 2003, when she turned 97, she retired, but I believe it was in 2003, she turned 100. And body was frail, mind still sharp as a tack. And UW-Stevens Point School of Education asked her to come and talk with their education students, the kids studying to be teachers, because she was one of the last, it's on videotape, and I want to get a videotape, I want to find it someday, they have it on the archives at Point. She was one of the last of the one-room schoolhouse teachers, and they just thought it would be cool for historical purposes for the new teachers to kind of hear what it was like. What was Little House on the Prairie really like? And she shared stories about, her favorite detention was having guys split wood after school in winter to make firewood. And now she probably ended up in prison for doing that. But it always impressed me because those kids every year on her birthday would either send cards or come to her house and thank her for being their teacher. And it was never Edna, it was, "Thank you, Mrs. Riley." And at the end of this presentation of what was life like in the one-room schoolhouse, somebody not too much older than you, a future teacher who was wrapping up her degree, asked my grandma a really good question. "Mrs. Riley, you taught from 25 to 2003. Are kids today different than kids in 2025? Now, I want to ask you, don't think about you. You're not going to offend me, so I'm not going to say, "What do you think my grandma said?" No, think about your typical old school, non-emotional German grandmother who married an Irishman that probably scandalized her German past, that one-room schoolhouse. What do you think a typical teacher like that, looking at you at 105, would say about your generation versus the kids in 1925? What would be the differences? A little bit louder, dear. Not lazy. I've heard that about your generation. We won't talk about why I've got pasta on reserve, but yeah, I've heard that of your generation. What else would you think? Not my grandma per se, but an old school, hard line, break the knuckles with the ruler teacher. What do you think that they would say about your generation versus 25? Have fun with it. You're not going to hurt me or my grandma. She's already received her glory. No respect. No respect for your elders. I've heard that said of your generation. I've heard that said. What else? What else do you think might have been said? Or would be said? If you have brought one thing up, they're so attached to their cell phones. All they do is snap, snap, snap. I've heard that said of your generation. All right, since we're going there, what are the other negative things do you think an old school teacher from 1925 would say about your generation? Awkward, isn't it? It is. And it should be awkward, because none of that's true. None of those presumptions are true. Now, St. Olaf kiddos, some of you might have heard this story before, so you can't answer. Sacred Heart St. Pat's kiddos. What do you think my grandmother said to that question? Is the kid in 25 different than the kid in 03? Let's see. Close. If you didn't hear, the answer was same, just taught differently. I like that. Put it back on the teacher. I like that. Good job. We're not the problem. Our teachers are the problem. I like that. Thank you. Good job. Touche. My grandmother, like that, said, the kid in 1925 and the kid in 2003 are no different. The kid, when I first started teaching, wants the same thing that the kid in 2003 wants. They want to be loved, and that's what I do. Boom. Grandma mic drop at 100 years old with the walker. And that simple answer, she might not have realized it impacted not only those teachers that day at UW Stevens Point who were about to become school teachers. It hit me. Because I'm like, that's why I loved running over across the road to her house every day. That's why I always considered her my best friend and always felt weird about it because everybody else my age, their best friend was a kid in the class where my best friend's grandma. Not just because she was a good cook. Didn't hurt. And for me, my grandmother was a Baptist convert. She converted to Catholicism. She converted when she met my dad, my grandpa. And one of the things that was so beautiful about my grandmother, even after she became Catholic, she never was afraid to ask a question about faith. Way back before you were born, eons and eons ago, there was this practice that the church used to do on All Souls Day, where you would come in to the church, pray for somebody who had died, then you walk out of the church, then you walk back in, pray for somebody else. My grandma had a logical question. Can any of you guess what that question was? Why don't we just stay in the church? So she asked my traditional Irish grandfather, Anthony Riley, Anthony, I totally am comfortable as a convert to Catholicism with praying for somebody who's died. I totally get that. Why not just come in, pray for everybody, and then leave? And my devout Catholic Irish grandfather said, if you want to start your own church, woman, there's the door. Which was his code word for, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. Ever since that happened, one of the things I admired about my grandmother, she was never afraid to ask a question. When I would come home from seminary, she would always say to me, come over to my house. I've got some questions for you. Questions your grandfather would never answer. But you're in seminary. And I loved it. I want you to have the safety today to ask any question you want, to ask anything you want. My grandmother taught me to respect the question. Fear well, start your own church then, lady. That's what she taught me to fear. I don't fear the questions. Questions are how we grow. And so therefore, as part of today, when we pray, before you're confirmed, whether you're Sacred Heart St. Pat's or St. Olaf, you're going to have a chance to both put prayer requests in the basket, but also anonymously write out questions that you would want me to address with your classes, whether you're St. Pat's, Sacred Heart, or St. Olaf, before you're confirmed. Because if you have something on your heart, let's talk. My grandma would want it that way. I won't bring any apples, though, or pencils. So, for me as a priest, I thought, all right, I'm going to go forward and be a priest. I'm going to make sure that my kids always feel loved. And I learned something very quickly as a priest. I was shocked how many kids, because I was a high school chaplain for 7 years. So I was a classroom teacher. You'd have to put up with me for a class. Whether it be religion, I taught astronomy, I taught literature, I did directed studies courses on C.S. Lewis books, all that kind of stuff. You'd have to put up with me as a teacher. And I was afraid because I just always knew I was loved. And I was shocked how many kids that I met who would look at me and say, am I loved? And usually what it was is that the kids would be learned, the students I had, they knew how to meet their parents' expectations. They knew how to meet their teachers' expectations. They knew how to get good grades on a test, either legitimately or maybe questionably. They knew how to make mom and dad happy, but they weren't happy. There was something missing in them. They would come and talk to me about, Father, am I loved? And so therefore, as this first presentation, I know you, but I don't know you. We've talked, but we haven't talked. I know where you've been, but I don't know where you've been. I want you to reflect with this one simple question. Are you loved? Are you loved? Do you have that sense of authentic love? And like I said at the introduction, we're not talking, oh, it'd be warm fuzzy. No, that's not the love we want. Because Grandma was tough. She wasn't a warm fuzzy, but I knew she loved me. I want you to ask, are you loved by your friends? Are you loved by your family? Are you loved by God? And do you have that sense that you're loved by God? Or is there a distance there? Is there a separation there? Now, if to any of those questions you feel like, no, I'm not loved, don't worry, it's okay. To explore those questions with you. Because as we move forward to this day, you are loved. And we're going to explore why. Sounds good? And being that Allie is stuck in behind me, that means it's time for some music.
So I'm just here whenever you need me.
Very good. Why don't you go ahead and pipe in?
I am chosen, not forsaken. I am who you say I am. You are for me, not against me. I